I think when you first start out in things, you're working in places and doing things that you may not understand or weren't what you thought. So I did do some traveling when I was in Detroit. I worked on the subway system in Washington, D.C. So I don't know that I had struggles so much as eventually getting into a company that was challenging to be at and work in and succeed, and the direction was not always that clear. So as that terminated, now I'm halfway through my career and started CorrTech. So those are the struggles: people, and both coworkers and clients are the challenges that I typically am faced with.
And I would probably say the same thing. It's hard to pick out one particular struggle uh, that made life difficult. But as you're going through your career and you're dealing with different industries and technologies, the common factor ends up always being people. Whether you're trying to supervise people, sell people on the services you're providing, or just find clients. That's probably the biggest challenge is always effectively dealing with people. And we've had that conversation with people that are here that are young, that aspire to have a career. Well, any career that generally goes on for a long time, eventually you're going to be placed in charge of people. So it becomes the biggest challenge is learning how to be a leader, learning how to take direction and work within a group, uh, and be productive. So we certainly have all run across people who can be unproductive leaders, and they don't motivate people. But always been the biggest challenge. It's not learning technology, because you can put enough hours into learning technology. Um, it's understanding what makes people tick, and how to work with them, whether they be a client, a vendor, a contractor, or an employee. So even today, I would say Scott and I both say it's probably the hardest thing about continuing to work in the industry in a small company that's growing is how do you assess personalities and who's going to be productive, who's going to fit, and how to keep them engaged.
Yeah, one of the guys that I worked with here probably 25 years ago, he would say, this job's pretty good. If it wasn't for the clients, it would be a lot better. So unfortunately, like it or not, as a consultant, clients are the ones and the people that we're providing our service to and have the relationships with, by which we provide a service and get paid. So it's a relationship that has to be developed, nurtured, and providing quality services. You sustain those clients. So I went to work for an insurance company in Detroit. After about a year, I went to Washington, D.C. We lived in Maryland, worked in Washington, D.C. for about 3 years, 3 or 4 years, and decided we did not want to be in that part of the country anymore and wanted to get closer to Rhode Island, come back to New England, essentially. So I took a career move at that time. It was about 1983, and came to work for the New England Electric System before they divested the power industry, and was the corrosion engineer for a multi-billion-dollar company for manufacturing, wheeling, and selling electric power. And I moved to where I currently live today. I've been there a long time, raised a family and everything in that home, and I've been in New England since 1983. So that was my big move back to New England.
Well, my biggest career change, which led to where we are today, is while hopping around between oil fields and a gold mining assay lab. Um, as always happens, a college contact who also had trouble fitting into his major. He was a marine biologist. There were thousands of marine biologists spawned by the Jacques Cousteau generation. Um, Took a job in Pennsylvania at a plant which did protective coatings and basically corrosion protection. And he needed somebody to come and help him with the plant. So I took a job and moved to Pennsylvania and just did something completely different. So I went into the corrosion business in 1981, if you will, and then at that point became involved with NACE that Scott had been involved with when he was much younger, and became a NACE coatings inspector. I think it was the first class that was passed by NACE for their coating inspection services, and that started my path on the corrosion inspection and protection career. And then that lasted a few years, and then the next big move, which really is what set me on the path to where previous companies that we owned and now part of CorrTech was I started my own consulting company called Lund Coating Consultants, very innovative name, and did a few years of that, and then a company I was working for called Malcolm Perney owned another company called Perney Consumers Perney, and they were a water industry engineering and operations company. So I was doing water tank painting inspection for them, and they were a growing new little technical services group. And I remember Hugh Madden. Remember Hugh called me into the office and he goes, "Well, you're doing good work for us, but why don't you just come to work for us instead of us hiring you?" So at the time, I negotiated, which I thought was a blockbuster contract for myself. I actually got $30,000 a year, and I went to work, and that was in 1985, and that's really where my career took off in terms of being involved with not only the technology side, but developing business units, and preparing me for both a technical and a business career within corrosion engineering.
Yeah, so that's part of the caveat. It's not just a technical side of the business, which is something you can you learn and you learn as you go. But there's a business side to this discussion too that is a whole other challenge that most people can't appreciate, and I think a lot of people think you can start a business pretty easily and be successful. I don't think that's the case. I had actually had to call American Express the other day for something, and they said, "Congratulations on being a member for 40 years." I can remember getting my first American Express card when I was in Detroit, Michigan, working for John Fitzgerald. It's been a long time.
Yeah, I guess you could have taken, and you could have taken that route as well, right, Scott? I mean, you certainly could get a master's and a PhD in chemical engineering and corrosion, and be a lab guy, or be a paint formulator,
Right.
and not have to develop business and not have to do that. And I can't say exactly why it attracted me, but being wearing the many hats and being part of the organization to make it grow, in addition to becoming a subject matter expert, always appealed to me on a day-to-day basis more than being a guy stuck in a cubicle or in a laboratory studying one thing.
Yeah,
Maybe it was an educational weakness on my part, but that was certainly more attractive.
right, and it certainly adds to the challenges on a daily basis to have all these facets to deal with. Being out in the field, something both you and I like to do, but then you have to come back in the office and deal with the invoicing or reports or other things. So there's a lot of different things going on in my position here for sure. John Fitzgerald, so he was the energetic guy that would run around the office and say funny things and focus on the high quality of the services that he was dealing with. So I only spent about a year with him, but I can remember, different things he would have said and guidance he was providing. So to me, it was John Fitzgerald. Bob Huddis back in college, but John Fitzgerald. After that, it became figuring out on my own. When I went to the power company, nobody knew what I did at the power company. My boss really didn't care what I did at the power company, and was more concerned about, the nonsense of some of the workplace environment that goes on. Technically, I was it. all over the system, learning. That's where I learned a lot on my own, where I went to work with Ted, actually, at Consumers. So it was early on. Early on in my career was my most guidance provided.
Geez, I'm hurt. I thought I was going to be your mentor.
You were my mentor. Well,
yeah.
But when I came on, I was working with someone else who was actually between us, who really became quite problematic. He was quite a challenge to deal with, and he eventually left.
So opportunities come in many ways. That's a good opportunity.
One that closes and no one opens.
Yeah. I would say the biggest influencer, as I look back on my business style, my work ethic, other than my parents, would have been the guy I went to work for at Arbonite, which was in Pennsylvania. That was my first job where I was engaged at all multi levels within the company, from the owner, the vendors, the clients, and the supervised staff. I was engaged in all of that. And I think the one thing that, of the many things that Rich Nordstrom taught me, was just through observing him, was you can't do the job well when you deal with that many moving pieces if you only work 8 hours a day. It has to be a commitment to making things happen as fast as you can and do the right thing. But it might be a 12-hour day, it might be a 14-hour day, and so it was really that understanding that nobody's an expert in managing people, nobody's an expert in growing businesses. You learn as you go, and the only way you learn faster than the other guy is by putting in more hours. And that was I took that with me everywhere I went. I tried to work as hard and be as engaged and involved in depth early on, and maintain that work pace. And I think it's like the typist who can type really fast but makes mistakes. Well, they can make more mistakes because they can retype faster. Well, working a lot of hours, you learn. Scott and I have both learned and relearned lessons as we go. But as long as you're willing to put in the hours and the time, you can overcome those learning curve issues, because you're just working harder at it. So that's always been the case. That's where I would point to.
Not everybody can do that. So it's a self-motivating thing that all becomes, from your childhood. Some people can learn this stuff, but you're born and raised a certain way, and some people are motivated to excel, and some aren't. And so we worked hard to get to where we are, and have an operation here that's something we can be proud of. So I think the biggest thing for me is instrumentation. So early in the career, everything we worked with were analog meters. These have needles, these have scales, and you have to read the scale and interpret the data, the voltage or the current, based on that deflection of an analog meter. In fact, earliest on, we had to correct these things because they were not high enough internal resistance pieces of equipment, so you had to have a correction factor. So the answer wasn't 0.85, it was something else due to that correction and due to that resistance of the circuit. Today, these digital meters are highly accurate. Internal resistance is very high. Everything is done in digital displays. So I think that's a big improvement. What it does do, though, it takes away some of your thought process. So early on, you would have to understand and think more, I think, to document and come up with the right answers and what you were doing and document that. So what scale am I on? What scale am I reading? And I can remember some guys early on, they come back with data and say, how can you read 10 volts on a 2-volt scale? You look down a 2-volt scale, but you're reading 10 volts. How does that work? Of course, it doesn't work. And so it becomes a learning process to figure this stuff out. So for me, the digital equipment that we use today is quite good, actually. You know, waterproof and all this stuff. That was not the case when I started. And I still have some of those meters here in the office, quite a few of them. The MC Miller B1s were very versatile for their day.
I would say the as much as we focus on it, I would say safety has been a big difference in terms of just working in the industry that we work in, which is painting and inspecting elevated structures. I would say the biggest thing that has changed in the last 30 years has been the focus on personnel safety and what people were willing or asked to do that they would never be asked to do today. So it's been a good thing, but there's been a major change in confined space entry, elevated fall protection, dust masks, exposures to toxins such as lead, which we deal with on a removal basis. So, we just went in and did the job. I remember, now I didn't describe this, but I can remember distinctly working at, for 1 year as a supervisor at American Cyanamid in Wallingford. And this plant was built in World War One, and I was a young guy. I guess I could hold my breath longer than others. So when the semi-buried pump house for the formaldehyde tanks, the breaker kicked, we used to hold our breath and run into the formaldehyde house and reset the breakers so the plant could stay online. And there was no respirator. There was no even discussion of respirator. Just go in and go in and get that thing reset so we can keep going.
No
So
job hazard analysis, no day performance.
and we knew what the hazard was, but there was no mitigation at all. So that was interesting way of things have changed on a very specific basis for what we do here at CorrTech. Is we do a big part of our business is underwater inspection of storage tanks. And in my career, we started out in say 1994. Well, in the 1980s, we were inspecting the tanks empty. And in mid 1990s, we discovered that a good way of doing it was scuba diving. So as I talked about earlier, anything I could do to get scuba diving worked into the job. So we started diving inside the water storage tanks. We were involved in the initial industry regulations on how to do it well, and that continued to evolve. But we used to dive in wetsuits in the drinking water, do our best at disinfection, and a confined space entry on a swinging ladder, all the things you would never do today to get the job done. But that exposure led to the recognition that was not the right way to do in-service inspection, that really human beings were being put at risk and drinking water was being put at risk. So while consumers, and Scott was there, we developed the robotic method for doing inspection of drinking water storage tanks in 1995, the first ones in the United States to do that. So safety was bad or was what it was and then changed. But a lot of that focus on how to do the job better and safer is what led to some of the innovations we have today in CorrTech. And even if Scott talks about why did somebody develop a smart stack? Because there was a safety issue and there was a massive cost implication to a client to dig holes in the ground, right? So that led to the thinking of how do we do that better, and that's where we continue to do at CorrTech today, as we continue to look at those challenges for our customers and use our own kind of broad-based knowledge to find applications for existing technology. And we're not Elon Musk. We're not inventing electric cars, but we're using technologies that people haven't thought of to solve problems that exist. So that's been the big change for us.
Yeah, I think Richard Nixon is the one who started up OSHA and the EPA.
Yeah.
So prior to that, safety was not thought about as nearly as much as it is today. So there has been a big change, and I recall doing stuff that nobody was questioning anything in my early part of my career. So it is a big focus, and it's improved a lot of work sites so that less people are getting hurt, no doubt.